So this is the second video in which I'm talking about participles. In this one I'm talking about verbal adjectives. You can probably watch the videos in either order, however. So what's a participle or a verbal adjective? It's basically a hybrid between a verb and an adjective. It's based on a verb and has the kind of root meaning of that verb, but it has adjective endings. And like any adjective, it has to have the same endings or the same gender, number, and case as the noun that it's modifying. So here are some examples. Забытые, курящие, купленный, находящимся, любимый, потерянный. You notice some of the verbs that you already know. The roots there like любить, купить, курить, забыть. But then they have adjective endings. The participle, verbal adjectives especially, are very much in a high style. They will be used mostly in writing, although you may hear them in very formal speech, like a lecture, for example. But most often you'll see them in writing. There are some that are common enough that you'll hear them in everyday speech, but for the most part, they're used mostly in more formal situations and in writing. In most instances, you can replace sentences that have participles with sentences that have katori in them. And in everyday speech, that's what you would normally do. Let's look at an example here where we can see this. Вот человек, говорящий по-французски. Basically, this sentence means the same thing as вот человек, который говорит по-французски. And so again, why do we have the two different things that mean almost the same thing? Part of it is a style thing. Sometimes it's more efficient to use the participle. And there are some instances, we'll see one or two of those, where the meaning is slightly different. So there are 4 types of verbal adjectives: active, passive, and each of those have present and past. I've put how many stars next to how common they are. So past passives are the most common, and present passives are the least common. These two are in between. So active participles, we have 2 types. And one of the things I'll want you to be able to do is identify which type by what they look like. So present actives have a sh in them, and past actives have a psh in them. When we replace one of these with katori, in this case we'll use a present tense verb. That makes sense, present tense. In this case we'll use a past tense verb, past. And katori will be in the nominative. That makes sense because when something's active, it will be nominative case. It'll be the subject. This will make sense more when we see some examples. So present active, you can identify it by the sh. So, for example here, говорить, говорящий, следовать, следующий, начинать, начинающий, учиться, учащийся. I am not going to ask you to form these, so I'm not focusing on how exactly they're formed. You can get an idea, but I'm just going to ask you to recognize them, and then in some instances we are going to practice some of where we will replace it with katori. Here's some common ones. So будущий, it's like will be, future. Говорящий, желающий, пьющий, курящий. So what do these things mean? What they mean is a person or thing who does this action. So говорящий is a person who speaks. So maybe speaker. Пить, пьющий, person who is drinking. Курящий, person who is smoking, for example. It's not always person, it could be a thing as well. But obviously in these cases, most of the time, it's a person. Past active you can identify by the вш. So see these verbs here. Позвонить, позвонивший. Прочитать, прочитавший. Говорить, говоривший. Писать, писавший. There's some common ones here. Бывший means like former. So again, here it's person who did this thing, or thing who did this thing. So let's try some here. we have a sentence here with an active participle, and we are going to convert it to a sentence with который. Мальчик, читающий книгу, мой сын. If we look at this читающий, we have to be able to identify what kind is it. It's a present active. So when we replace it with который, we'll use present tense verb and который in nominative. So мальчик, который читает книгу, мой сын. Автор, написавший эту книгу, получил премию. Past active, so we'll want past tense verb, but obviously который in nominative. Автор, который написал эту книгу, получил премию. Люди, говорящие по-русски, наши друзья. Active, present. Люди, которые говорят по-русски, наши друзья. So, nominative case, but plural because of люди. Говорят, present tense. Мы говорили с занимающимися спортом студентами. Here, if we try to translate it into English, it becomes kind of awkward. We were speaking with the doing sports students. In English, I don't think we have two ways to say it. We have to say it more like который. We were speaking with the students who were doing sports or who are doing sports. So it should be present tense here. So, present, active. So который nominative, present tense verb. Мы говорили со студентами, которые занимаются спортом. Которые is replacing студенты, so plural, nominative case. Это история девушки, встретившей нас сегодня в Москве. Past, active. Это история девушки, которая встретила нас сегодня в Москве. So, past tense verb, которая nominative, and it's feminine because why? It's referring to девушка. Now let's take a look at passive participles. Again, there are two types, present tense and past tense. In this case, obviously present tense verb for present, past tense verb for past, just like we saw before. But in both cases, который will be in the accusative case. And that makes sense, doesn't it? When something's passive, it's receiving the action. It's the direct object. We'll see some examples. It'll make more sense as we go. Present passives are not all that common, but we can see some common ones that we recognize, like любимый. You knew любимый before. You thought of it as an adjective, but it's really a participle from the verb любить. So it's thing that is loved, right? Here's some common ones. Любимый, thing that's loved. Называемый, thing that's named. Уважаемый, thing that's, or person that's respected. Рекомендуемый, thing that's recommended. Past passives are by far the most common, and they have two possible, not endings, but middle parts. N or te. So some examples. Написанный, рассказанный, сделанный, проданный, забытый, обманутый, взятый, снятый. Again, I'm not focusing how to form these. You'll do that some more later in more advanced Russian study. I just want you to be able to recognize these, and then we'll work some also on converting to который. Past passives can also have short forms, so be like a short form adjective, and in that case it'll just be one N or one, well, it was one te before also, but it'll take short form endings, so like проблема решена, the problem is solved. Проблема была решена, the problem was solved. Проблема будет решена, the problem will be solved. So if you see something like that, like this, like this, like this, you can take a guess that it might be a past passive. Let's take a look at this sentence here. Я люблю этот роман, написанный Достоевским. I like that novel written by Dostoevsky. Instrumental case here. And when we have sentences like this with these participles, then the agent, the thing that did or is doing the action, is in the instrumental. And so when we rephrase it to use который, we'll need to make this back into nominatives. Let's think about how we'll rephrase it. I like that novel that Dostoevsky wrote. So Dostoevsky has to come back to being the subject. Я люблю этот роман, который Достоевский написал. Написанный is past passive, so we need past verb, and we need который in the accusative case. Который is accusative here. It's masculine inanimate, so it looks the same as nominative, but it's in the accusative. But we've had to convert Dostoevsky, who was instrumental here, to nominative here. And there is, in this instance, a slight difference in the meaning, right? I like that novel written by Dostoevsky is slightly different than I love that novel that Dostoevsky wrote. So here we'll try a few. These are a little challenging, but let's try them. Эту песню, написанную нашей любимой артисткой, мы уже купили на этом сайте. We already bought on that site this song written by our favorite artist. So written here, past passive, so we'll need past tense. We'll need который in the accusative case. And we'll need to put our favorite artist back into nominative. So let's see. Мы уже купили на этом сайте эту песню, которую написала наша любимая артистка. Который in accusative, referring to песня, so it's feminine accusative. We had to put our favorite artist back into nominative and then have the verb be in the past tense. Let's try a couple more. Этот дом, построенный в прошлом году, уже выглядит старым. That building built last year already looks old. So what are we going to do here? Этот дом, который построили в прошлом году, уже выглядит старым. That building, который has to be an accusative. Since it's referring to dom, it looks the same as nominative, but it's an accusative. Here I've put построили in the они form because here in the original sentence there was no agent expressed. We didn't say who built the building. So that's why I just put it in the они form, that they built last year. Past tense again because of past, passive. Two more. Какие молитвы, читаемые на службе, вы уже слышали? Which prayers that are read at the service have you already heard? Present passive. So present tense verb, but который in accusative. So, какие молитвы, которые читают на службе, вы уже слышали? So present tense verb, который is in the accusative. Here it's plural, referring to prayers here. Prayers are inanimate, so it stays looking like nominative, but it's in the accusative. Last one we'll try. I know these are challenging, but over time we'll try more and they'll get easier. Уже 20 лет журналу, издаваемому этой группой. There are already 20 years to that journal, or as we'd say in English, the journal is already 20 years old, that is put out by that group. So what do we want to do? Here we have to look present passive, so we'll want present tense verb. We'll need который in accusative case. And the group that's putting it out will have to go back into nominative case. So the journal is already 20 years old. That group puts out. So уже 20 лет этому журналу, который издает эта группа. Который in the accusative. It refers to journal here, so it's masculine, so it looks the same as nominative. Present tense verb, and then группа back into nominative case. If we look at our summary chart, here we have our verbal adjectives. We have actives and passives, past passive being the most common with n, and te. Present actives probably second most common with sh. Notice that all of the actives need katori in the nominative, all of the passives need katori in the accusative. I know these are challenging. That's why at this point I want you to be able to recognize them, and we'll continue to work more on being able to convert them to sentences with katori.